Some of the most important words a person ever carries are the ones they never say out loud. Not because they don't mean them, but because saying them requires a kind of openness that, for some people, takes an entire lifetime to find, and sometimes finds them too late. Bing Crosby sang words for a living. Beautiful words, warm words, words that made strangers feel understood, that made people sitting alone in their living rooms feel like someone was speaking directly to them. He sang of longing and home and love and peace, with a voice so natural it seemed like breathing. Millions of people around the world felt genuinely that Bing Crosby understood them. But those closest to him, his children especially, sometimes described a very different experience. A man who was, in private, more restrained than the voice suggested, more formal, more likely to show care through action, through providing, through being present at the right occasions, than through words. The warm words were there in the songs. In the home, they were quieter. His eldest sons, from his first marriage, spoke in later years about a relationship with their father that was complex, one in which love was clearly present, but not always clearly spoken. They knew he cared. They didn't always feel, growing up, that he had found a way to say so in the simple, direct way that children need. And Bing, toward the end of his life, seemed to carry some awareness of this, a quiet understanding that the words had often stayed inside, where they did less good than if they'd been spoken. He was of a generation and a temperament that made this common. Men of his era were often taught that love was demonstrated through provision and presence, not through words. That saying, "I love you," or "I'm proud of you," or "I'm sorry I wasn't more available," was somehow excessive, a kind of softness that wasn't called for. The words stayed inside. The people who needed them learned to read between the lines, or to understand love in its indirect forms, or, sometimes, to go without. Bing Crosby gave voice, in song, to some of the deepest emotions of the 20th century. And in his own home, with his own children, those same emotions moved through a kind of silence, present but unspoken, felt but rarely named. The gap between what he could express in a recording studio and what he could express across a dinner table was, for the people who loved him, quietly enormous. That was the regret, not dramatic, not talked about openly, but present in the quieter reflections of his later years, that the words were always there. He simply hadn't found a way to say them where it mattered most. Maybe you've felt something like that too. Maybe you were raised in a family where love was shown in indirect ways, where care came through action, through sacrifice, through showing up, but rarely through words. Where "I love you" wasn't said often, not because it wasn't felt, but because it simply wasn't part of the vocabulary of the household. And maybe you absorbed that habit, without quite deciding to, passing it on to your own children or your own relationships, carrying the emotion quietly inside without letting it become language. And maybe there are people in your life who have been waiting for years for something simple. Not something grand, just a few words that name what they already know is there, but that they've never quite heard spoken. I'm proud of you, I love you, and I should say that more. I'm sorry for the times I didn't show it the way you needed. These words don't require a special occasion. They don't require perfect phrasing. They just require the willingness to move them from inside to out, to let them exist in the air between you and the person who needs to hear them, even if saying them feels unfamiliar, even awkward, even slightly uncomfortable. That discomfort passes. What the words leave behind doesn't. There's something particular about hearing a feeling spoken aloud that reading it between the lines can never quite replace. Even when the person knows, even when they're certain, in every rational sense, that they are loved or valued or forgiven, hearing it said in the other person's voice in real time does something different. It settles in the body differently. It stays in the memory differently. It carries weight that silence, however well-intentioned, simply cannot. Bing Crosby's voice is still heard today in recordings, in films, in the holiday songs that return every year like old friends. And for millions of people who never met him, that voice represents warmth and home and the particular comfort of Christmas. But for the people who lived alongside that voice, who were in the same house, at the same table, available to hear it in its most private form, something else was sometimes more present than the warmth. The silence between the songs. The words that lived in the music, but not in the room. This isn't a story meant to diminish him. He was a product of his time and his temperament, and a long history of learning that certain kinds of expression weren't safe or expected or required. Most of us are. But it is a story worth sitting with, because the distance between what we feel and what we say is something almost everyone carries to some degree. And the cost of that distance is almost always paid by the people who love us most. Maybe it's time to close that distance, even slightly. Not through a grand gesture, not through a letter that tries to say everything at once, or a conversation designed to resolve years of silence. Just one sentence, said simply, to one person who needs to hear it. Whatever that sentence is for you. Maybe it's, "I'm proud of you," to a child who has worked hard and hasn't heard it enough. Maybe it's, "I love you, and I don't say it nearly as often as I should," to a spouse who has been carrying the doubt quietly for years. Maybe it's, "I'm sorry," to a family member whose hurt you've always known was real, but never quite acknowledged aloud. Whatever it is, it's probably not as hard to say as you've been telling yourself it is. And it will almost certainly matter more than you can currently imagine. The songs Bing Crosby left behind are gifts. Generous, enduring, genuinely beautiful. They give comfort to people who never knew him. But the words that would have meant the most were the ones he kept inside. The ones that his children and the people who loved him waited quietly for. Some of them heard them eventually in small ways. Some of them didn't. You have the chance to say yours. Not in a song. Not in a form anyone else will ever hear. Just to the person in front of you, or on the phone, or at the other end of a letter. In your own voice, imperfect and plain. in exactly the words you actually have, even if they don't sound as beautiful as a Bing Crosby record. They will sound better to the person who needs them than anything else you have ever offered. If you're watching this tonight and someone's face came to mind, someone who has been waiting quietly for words you've been meaning to say, maybe this week is the week. Not because everything is perfect, not because you finally found the right moment, just because the words are there and the person is still here, and that is enough. There's another side to this worth sitting with gently. Maybe you're not the one holding the words inside. Maybe you're on the other side, the one who has been waiting. The one who knows intellectually that you are loved, that you are valued, that your parent or your partner or your old friend cares about you. But you haven't heard it spoken, not directly, not clearly, in a long time. Maybe ever. If that's where you are, here's something to consider. The people who struggle to say these words are almost never withholding them out of indifference. They're usually people who simply were never taught how. People who grew up in homes where this kind of directness wasn't available either, who absorbed the silence and passed it forward the way all unexamined patterns get passed forward, generation to generation. Understanding that doesn't erase the ache of not hearing what you needed to hear, but it might change how the silence feels. Less like rejection, and more like an inherited limitation that the person who loves you has never quite found their way around. And it might give you something useful, the possibility of asking. Not demanding, not confronting, just asking. Something as simple as, "Can I tell you something? I've realized I need to hear every now and then that you're proud of me, or that you love me. I know you do. But hearing it said out loud matters to me." Most people, when they receive an invitation like that, stated gently, without blame, don't push back. They feel something loosen. Because often they've been wanting to say the thing all along and simply didn't know it was needed, or allowed, or safe. Your asking gives them permission. It opens the door. Bing Crosby sang White Christmas until it became the best-selling single in history. He gave strangers a feeling of home and warmth and belonging in a few minutes of recorded music on a scale almost no artist before or since has managed. And yet, in his own home, the warmth found it hard to move from his chest to the air between him and the people who needed it most. That's not a judgment on him. It's a recognition of how hard this particular thing is for so many people. Even people with enormous emotional expressiveness in one setting can be entirely closed in another. The public channel and the private channel don't always carry the same current. But the fact that it's hard doesn't mean it's impossible. And the fact that the habit has been in place for years or decades doesn't mean it can't shift, even a little, starting now. Even a small shift in the direction of more directness, more naming of what's actually felt, can change the whole climate of a close relationship. Not because one conversation fixes everything, but because it signals something, that the distance is not permanent, that the door is not locked, that the person inside the silence is still reachable, still willing to try. That matters more than any single perfectly chosen word. If you're watching this tonight, maybe someone came to mind, someone to whom you owe a few plain words, or someone from whom you've been quietly waiting to receive them. Maybe this is the week to move, in either direction, gently, imperfectly, but forward. So take a slow breath, and maybe this week, let the words out, or invite them in, plain and imperfect and real, the way love usually sounds when it finally speaks.